Welcome to my channel. I'm Nancy Thompson, your storyteller of American folklore, thrilling mysteries, and all sorts of captivating topics. Join me for today's tale, folks. Once upon a time, in the bustling town of Kingsgate, there lived a wealthy and well-known businessman named Walter King. His wife, Lily King, was as beautiful as a spring blossom. Together, they had a daughter named Julia King. Julia was a knockout, a real head-turner, breathtakingly gorgeous. Walter and Lily adored their little girl to pieces. They held her like she was made of glass, afraid she'd break, and treasured her like candy that might melt away in their mouths. Julia King grew up swimming in a pool of honey, spoiled rotten you might say, because her parents doted on her endlessly. She developed a stubborn streak a mile wide. Whatever it was, Julia called the shots, no questions asked. By the time she hit 16, her heart started fluttering with springtime dreams, imagining she'd stumble into a picture-perfect romance. One day, Julia and her best friend, Tracy Miller, hopped into the family car and headed into the city for the annual spring festival. The fairgrounds were buzzing with excitement. Crowds packed the streets, cheers echoing non-stop through the air. Curiosity got the better of them, so they squeezed through the throng to get a closer look. There, they spotted a teenage boy putting on a show. Sure, his clothes were nothing fancy, but he had a charm that drew every eye. The kid was talented, really something special, and looked about 18 or 19 years old. Julia's heart started racing like a deer caught in headlights. Her big dreamy eyes locked straight onto the boy's face, staring without blinking, clapping like crazy to cheer him on. The teenager performed for a bit longer, then clasped his hands together and said, "Thanks for coming out, everyone. If you've got cash, toss it in. If not, no worries." Then he picked up a wooden box and started collecting tips from the crowd. When he made his way over to Julia, she nudged Tracy to drop a fat stack of bills into the wooden box. "You're amazing out there," she gushed. The teenager caught sight of this stunning girl, singing his praises, and his eyes lit up like fireworks. The tips of his ears turned a little red, and he shrugged, "Just some small tricks, you know." "Thanks, miss." The teenager wrapped up his act, but Julia stuck around, watching him like she was glued to the spot. The sky started turning dark, and Tracy tugged at her arm, saying, "Hey, we should head home, it's getting late." Julia didn't budge, pouting. "Nah, let's wait till he's done for real. Then we'll go." By the time dusk settled in, the boy finally packed up his gear to call it a day. Julia whispered to Tracy, "Go ask him his name, and if he'll be back tomorrow." Tracy, being the sharp gal she was, caught on to Julia's little crush right away. She strolled over to the teenager and struck up a chat. He grinned and said, "Name's Daniel Grayson. Yeah, I'll be back here tomorrow, same spot." When Tracy relayed the news, Julia's face lit up with relief. She flagged down a cab, and the two of them headed back home, Julia already daydreaming about seeing him again. For the next few days straight, Julia dragged Tracy into the city, showing up to cheer Daniel on every time he performed. In between his stunts, she'd steal a moment to talk to him, piecing together his story bit by bit. Daniel told her he hailed from Grayson Hollow, a little village just east of town. His dad had been a stuntman, a real daredevil, and Daniel had been tumbling alongside him since he was 4 or 5. But last year, tragedy struck. His father botched a risky move and didn't make it. Now it was just Daniel and his mom, scraping by on whatever he could earn with his acrobatics. Julia listened to Daniel spill his guts, and her heart swelled with sympathy and a little awe. She thought to herself, "This guy's tough as nails. He's got guts and responsibility. Stuff you don't see in those rich boys back home." To show her support, she kept showing up day after day, rooting for Daniel like his personal cheerleader. But her constant trips into the city? They didn't go unnoticed. Walter and Lily started raising eyebrows at her odd behavior. One evening, Walter pulled Tracy aside into the study. "Spill it," he said, arms crossed. Tracy fidgeted but couldn't dodge the question. She caved and told Lily everything. How Julia was smitten with this street performer. Lily passed it on to Walter. And the two of them sat down, worried sick. Walter sighed. She's 16 now. Old enough to settle down. We can't let her run wild and ruin the family name. Walter and Lily hashed it out and decided. Time to find Julia a proper match. They settled on a guy from Kingsgate. Samuel Sam Tucker, heir to the Tucker family fortune. The Tuckers had been in business for generations. Owned acres of prime land. And were just as loaded as the Kings. A perfect rival match, really. Sam Tucker was a bookworm through and through. Sure, his family ran a big operation. But Sam couldn't care less about the business side. He'd rather bury his nose in a novel than a ledger. When Walter broke the news to Julia. Hey, we're setting you up with Sam Tucker. She was livid, 100% against it. Sam Tucker, she snapped. That guy's a total bore. All he does is read books, till he's a walking library. No way I'm marrying him. Lily tried to reason with her. The Tuckers are solid folks, hon. Sam's a hard worker, got a bright future ahead. If he makes it big, you'll be set for life. Even if he doesn't, you'll never want for anything. But Julia shot back, marrying someone I don't love? Even a mansion and a feast would taste like cardboard. I'd rather be with the guy I choose. Even if it's just soup and greens, it'd still be sweet. Walter and Lily knew their daughter was as stubborn as a mule. Talking her out of it wasn't working. So they switched gears. They figured they'd track down this Daniel Grayson kid. And convince him to back off. One day, after Daniel finished his street show. And was packing up to head home. Walter stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path. You're Daniel Grayson, right? He asked, voice firm. Daniel squinted at the stranger, unsure what was up. Yeah, that's me. Who are you? Walter didn't mince words. I'm Julia's dad, Walter King. She's been pampered her whole life. She's not cut out for hardship with a guy like you. I want you to stay away from her. You two are from different worlds. Daniel took Walter's words like a punch to the gut. Sure, he liked Julia. She was sweet on him too. But they'd never put a label on it. It was just mutual admiration, nothing official. Hold up, Daniel said, frowning. I think you've got the wrong idea. I'm not with your daughter, we're not a thing. There's no staying away to do here. With that, he slung his bag over his shoulder and walked off, leaving Walter standing there, stewing. The next time Julia showed up to watch Daniel perform, he barely acknowledged her. Kept his distance, didn't chat like before. Julia noticed the cold shoulder right away. Tears welled up as she blurted, "What did I do to tick you off?" Daniel sighed, avoiding her gaze. "You're a rich girl, Julia, somebody's princess. I'm just a broke kid from the sticks. We don't mix. How could you tick me off?" "But you're not like you used to be," she pressed. "Your dad made it clear we're not the same," Daniel muttered. "Let's just keep it that way." Julia stormed home, fury boiling over, and marched straight up to Walter. "What did you say to him?" she demanded. Walter stayed calm, laying it out plain. "That Grayson kid's a nobody, a street performer. What's he got to offer? You two don't belong together. Think about it, Julia. You're not in the same league." "What's wrong with being a performer?" she fired back. "He's not a thief or a cheat, he earns his keep fair and square. I like him, Dad. If I don't marry him, I'm not marrying anyone." She spun on her heel, slammed her bedroom door, and collapsed on her bed, sobbing her eyes out. Walter hovered outside Julia's door, trying to coax her out with soft words. "Sweetheart, we just want what's best for you. We don't want you suffering down the road." But inside, he and Lily were beside themselves. That night, they sat in the living room, frowning into their coffee cups, brainstorming how to sway their headstrong girl. "She's been spoiled since day one," Lily murmured. "When she sets her mind to something, it's like trying to pull a train off its tracks." "We can't let her mess around with that kid," Walter growled. "My reputation's on the line here. I'll go talk to him again tomorrow. This has to stop." Lily fretted, "If Julia finds out you're meddling again, she'll flip out, could make things worse." But Walter wouldn't budge. He and Lily wanted Julia to ditch Daniel for good. Yet they were scared she'd do something rash if pushed too hard. After chewing it over, Walter made up his mind. He'd pay a visit to Grayson Hollow. Before dawn the next morning, he hit the road, driving out to Daniel's village. Lily stayed behind, keeping an eye on Julia. Her nerves all jangled up. Walter got back later, looking worn out, and told Lily, "It's half done, handled as much as I could." Meanwhile, Julia couldn't stand being cooped up at home, fuming for 2 days straight. She grabbed Tracy and said, "Let's go, I need to see him." They rolled into the city, hitting Daniel's usual spot, but he was nowhere in sight. Julia asked around at the nearby shops, and folks said, "Daniel? Haven't seen him in 2 days." Not ready to give up, she dragged Tracy to Grayson Hollow to track him down. When they got to the village, Julia asked around, till she got the scoop. Daniel and his mom had up and moved, gone, just like that. She knew her dad had something to do with it. Storming back home, she cornered Walter. "What did you do to them? Where'd they go?" Walter tried to play it cool. "Julia, wake up. That kid took off for cash. $100, and he was out the door. A guy like that's not worth your tears." Julia shook her head, fierce. "No way. Daniel's strong, he's got honor. He wouldn't sell out for dirty money. Even if he did, he'd have a reason. I'm finding him." For over a month, Julia scoured the county, asking anyone and everyone about Daniel. No luck, not a trace. The longing hit her hard, and she got sick. Too torn up to eat or drink. Just lying in bed, crying till her face was soaked. Seeing her waste away. Walter and Lilys Herz brach. Lily sobbed to Walter, "If anything happens to her. If she doesn't pull through, I'm done too." Walter paced the house, guilt gnawing at him. "What do we do now?" he muttered, lost. Right then, Tracy burst in. "There's some old guy outside, says he needs to see you, Mr. King." Walter stepped out, wary, and found a weathered man in a plain coat, looking like he'd walked 1,000 miles. The stranger spoke slow and steady. "I was passing through town today, and I couldn't help but notice. There's a dark cloud hanging over your house. If it's not cleared out soon, someone's not making it 3 days." Walter didn't buy it at first, but Julia's state flashed in his mind, and he thought, maybe this guy's onto something. Walter ushered the man inside quick. "You're saying my family's cursed or something? What's causing it, and why?" The old guy paused, thinking it over. Then said, "You asked, so I'll tell you straight. Your daughter's lovesick bad. That's where this trouble's coming from. If it doesn't lift, she's got 3 days tops before it takes her." Walter blinked. This stranger had never set foot in their home. Yet he knew Julia's exact problem. Suddenly, he was all ears. Desperate for a fix. "How do we stop it?" he pressed. The old man leaned back, his voice steady. "Love's a funny thing. Fate's got its hands all over it. You can't force it one way or another. There's only one way to break this. Let it run its course, follow what's meant to be." Walter hesitated, chewing on the words. He didn't want to hear it. The idea of Julia ending up with some nobody like Daniel? It stuck in his craw. "There's gotta be another way," he pushed. The stranger stood up, shrugging. "I've pointed you to the path. Take it or leave it, that's on you." Then he walked out, leaving Walter in a daze. Lily had been eavesdropping from the hallway. Once the old man was gone, she rushed in and grabbed Walter's arm. "We've only got one daughter, Walt. If she wants this boy, let her have him. The business'll be hers someday anyway. She won't go hungry." Walter couldn't argue with the stranger's eerie insight, and Lily's begging tipped the scales. "Fine," he grumbled, for Julia's sake. Determined to save her, he rounded up some help and set out to find Daniel Grayson pronto. 2 days of searching turned up nothing. Daniel was a ghost. Then, by pure luck, Walter bumped into that old stranger again. "He's southwest of the county line," the guy said, but didn't give an exact spot. Walter wasn't about to quit. After some serious legwork, he finally tracked Daniel and his mom down. "In Arandown Trailer Park, tucket in the hills." Daniel's mom, Laura Grayson, glared at him. "We already left town. What more do you want?" Walter swallowed his pride.
Juwe got it wrong.
I'm here to talk wedding plans. For our kids. Laura's jaw tightened. Your fancy family? We can't touch that kind of status. Her tone was ice cold. But Walter wasn't backing down. For Julia's happiness. He apologized, hat in hand, and swore Daniel would be treated right from now on. It took a lot of convincing. But Laura finally gave a grudging nod to the marriage idea, though she wasn't thrilled about it. Back home, Julia heard the news. Her dad was setting her up with Daniel and begging for it. She bolted out of bed shouting, "I'm starving." Tears of joy streaked her face as she hugged everyone in sight.
Walter wetschet Julia bounce back.
And for a second, he thought about backtracking.
My bestalling the wedding date.
But Julia caught the vibe. And her mood tanked again, appetite gone. Lily jumped in, nudging Walter. Let's get this done, she's been through enough.
Walter knie Julias lovesickness wasn't ageman humore.
He picked a date, brought Daniel and Laura back to King's Gate, and started prepping for the big day. The wedding went off without a hitch. And the early days were pure bliss for Julia and Daniel. She felt like the luckiest girl alive. Walter, wanting the best for her, told Daniel, "No more street gigs, son. You're with me now, part of the family business." Daniel turned out to be a natural. Smooth-talking, quick on his feet, and a hard worker to boot. He became Walter's right-hand man, slowly winning the old man over with his grit. Daniel had big ideas and pitched one to Walter. Why not expand the business? Let's open a shop in the city, go all in. Walter liked the hustle, so he agreed. They rented a storefront downtown. And Daniel took every penny they'd saved, heading out of state to score some primo inventory. But fate had other plans. On the road, bandits hit their convoy, robbed them blind.
Walter and Daniel barelimade it back alive.
Scraping by with just the shirts on their backs. The King family, once the talk of the town, went from riches to rags overnight. Walter and Lily's hair turned gray with the stress. Their empire gone in a flash.
Daniel steppet up, resolute.
Don't worry, Mom and Dad, he said, using the in-law terms like they were second nature.
This mes won't break us.
I'll go out and make enough to keep us afloat. Walter figured Daniel's old street gig was their only shot now. Pride didn't matter when survival was on the line.
Daniel hit the streets again.
Tumbling and flipping for tips in the city. The cash was peanuts, barely enough to scrape by. He'd bring home cheap bread or rice, handing it over to Walter, Lily, and Julia, while he and Laura stuck to foraging wild greens. Nobody's heart was made of stone. Walter and Lily couldn't stomach eating, while their kids went hungry. They split the measly portions with Laura, all of them tightening their belts together. The hits just kept coming.
Aliki ruf met endless rein.
Their rundown house couldn't take much more. Then Daniel caught a nasty bug after a downpour. And it laid him out flat, real bad. Julia clung to him, bawling her eyes out. Walter and Lily watched their son-in-law waste away, their hearts twisting like knives. Laura cried till she passed out beside him. The doc came by and shook his head. Saving him's gonna cost a fortune. You folks are broke. Best you can do is let him go. Julia fainted at the doc's words, and Walter and Lily splashed her awake with warm water. When she came to, a wild idea took root in her head. She'd sell whatever she had left to save Daniel. Before dawn, while her folks were still asleep, she slipped out of the house, heading for town with nothing but grit. At the city gates, she stumbled on a crowd buzzing about something. Folks gawking and chattering like it was a show. Julia didn't care much, her mind was elsewhere. But then she overheard a hawker yelling, "Caught this beauty up on Pinnacle Peak.
Sogt ab the sun and moon's finest. Prime Medizinereit hier.
Steep it in whiskey, and it'll cure anything." Julia froze, her ears perking up. One thought screamed in her head. This could save Daniel. She shoved through the crowd, and saw it, a huge green snake, tied up tight with straw. "Is this for real?" she asked, voice shaky. "Will it really heal someone?" The snake seller grinned at Julia's question. "All business. You ever heard of Pinnacle Peak?" That sacred ground, practically magic. Anything from up there's got healing juice. This ain't no ordinary snake. Soak it in whiskey, and it'll fix you up good. Cures everything, keeps you young too. Men get stronger, ladies get prettier. And you're already a looker, miss. How about taking it home to try? Julia, dead set on saving Daniel, cut to the chase. How much? The guy smirked. Today's your lucky day. I can tell you're serious. $2, and it's yours. No profit for me. Julia patted her pockets. Empty, not a dime. The seller clocked her hesitation and waved it off. No cash?
No big here, kid.
That ring on your finger, leave it with me. Bring the $2 tomorrow. And I'll hand it back, good as new. Julia's jewelry was long gone, pawned off in tough times. All she had left was that ring. She wavered, but the thought of Daniel dying? She grit her teeth, slid it off, and said, "Give me the snake." The guy bit the ring to test it, chuckled, stuffed the snake in a sack, and handed it over. "Get it home quick, 7 days in whiskey, then drink up." Julia clutched the sack, a spark of hope flickering in her chest. If this works, Daniel's saved. No selling myself, just us, happy again. She hightailed it toward home, cutting through a quiet stretch of mountain road. Then, out of nowhere, a voice. "Hey miss, you did it. Let me out." Julia jumped, spinning around, nobody there. The voice came again, insistent. She traced it to the sack, dropped it like it was on fire, and stammered, You're some kind of snake freak." A raspy reply slithered out. "I'm no freak, I'm a 1,000-year-old rattler. Got nabbed shedding my skin up on the peak. Please, set me free. I'll pay you back someday, swear it." Julia stared at the sack, torn between that and Daniel wasting away. "Look," she said, voice cracking. "I need you for whiskey, to save my husband. I'm sorry, but I can't let you go. I love him too much, I'd die without him." The snake hissed back, "Don't be dumb. Your man's not sick, you are." Julia blinked, stunned by the snake's words. Couldn't believe it, didn't want to. But the truth hit her like a freight train, crushing her will to keep going. She sank to her knees, undid the sack, and untied the straw. The snake slithered out, coiling up. "Thanks, kid," it said. "Go home. 3 days from now. I'll marry you." Julia nodded numbly, said goodbye to the critter, and trudged back home, acting like nothing happened. With no money for a cure, Daniel's condition tanked fast. 3 days later, he was gone. Julia threw herself over his body, sobbing till she couldn't breathe. Laura wailed, keeling over in grief. Walter and Lily tried consoling her, tears streaming as they begged her to hold on. Laura pulled herself together long enough to croak at Walter, "It's hot today. Let's bury him quick, give him peace." Walter scraped up some cash for a cheap coffin, and they laid Daniel to rest that same day. With Daniel gone, Laura's spirit turned to ash. She faced Walter and Lily, voice hollow. "I'm leaving, got kin elsewhere to lean on." The Kings were too beat down to argue. If Laura had family to run to, good for her. She packed her bags that night, ready to split at first light. But as she stepped out, a guy in a green jacket blocked her path. "You've done some rotten stuff," he said. "And now you're bolting?" Laura stumbled back, spooked. "Who the hell are you? What are you talking about?" The green jacket guy smirked. "Take a look and see." 2 figures got dragged in, hands tied. The old stranger and Daniel? Laura's face went white as a sheet. She hit the ground hard. Walter and Lily froze, jaws dropping. Daniel was dead, buried. So how was he standing there? Julia stepped forward, already clued in by the snake's cryptic words. She hauled off and slapped Daniel across the face, hard enough to echo. "You're no man," she spat. "I loved you, gave up everything, and you did this?" Daniel rubbed his cheek, then pointed at Laura. "She's the one behind it all." Laura glared at Walter, venom in her eyes. "I wanted you to feel what I felt. Losing a daughter, over and over." She reached up and peeled off a mask. A fake face, revealing someone else entirely. Walter nearly passed out. It was Laura Springfield, his old flame from way back. Before Lily, he'd been head over heels for Laura. Promised her forever. Until everything went sideways. Laura had gotten pregnant with Walter's kid. But his dad found out and lost it. To save face, he forced Walter to marry Lily instead. Laura, unmarried and expecting, was a scandal waiting to happen. Her folks hushed it up, marrying her off to a guy named Don Grayson, Daniel's dad. Daniel was 3 when Laura became his stepmom. She carried Walter's baby to term. But the little girl died at birth, or so she thought. Broken and bitter. She blamed Walter for it all, swearing he'd pay by losing his own daughter someday. Laura's revenge was simple. Destroy Julia, Walter's pride and joy. Don and Daniel? They were in it for the King family fortune. The 3 of them cooked up a scheme. Daniel's street act was the bait, reeling Julia in step by step. The Kings fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, walking right into their trap. Walter stared at Laura, finally spilling a secret he'd buried deep. That baby didn't die, Laura. Julia's your daughter, ours. Laura reeled, shaking her head. No way. My girl's dead. She didn't make it past day 1. You're lying. Walter's voice cracked. It's the truth. Don brought her to me. I begged him to. I'm sorry. I owed you, and I gave her everything I could. Lily raised her like her own. Laura snapped, lunging at the old stranger, ripping off his mask too. It was Don Grayson, Daniel's dad. You bastard, she screamed. You told me she died. What's the real story? Walter gaped at Don's real face. You brought me the baby, Don. Why'd you tell Laura she was dead? Don sighed, no dodging it now. He looked at Laura, defeated. I did it for you, and the kid. Thought it'd be better this way. Laura grabbed his collar, screaming. If I'd known Julia was mine, why would I try to hurt her? Talk, damn it. Is she really my daughter? She spun to Julia, reaching out. But Julia shoved her away. I don't have a mom like you. Don't touch me. Laura's eyes burned as she glared at Don and Daniel. You poisoned Julia. Today you're both done. She snatched a pair of scissors off the table and lunged at Daniel, stabbing him square in the chest. He crumpled, blood pooling fast. Don bolted for the door, but the guy in the green jacket snagged him, hauling him back. County sheriff's getting you too, he said, dragging Don and a dying Daniel off to face justice. Laura collapsed, sobbing. Baby, you've got poison in you. No cure, just a transfer. Find someone to take it, quick, or you're dead in 3 days. Julia sneered at her. You wicked hag. Killing me wasn't enough? Now you want me to hurt someone else? Not happening. Just then, the green jacket guy strolled back in. Julia, he said, I'm marrying you. She nodded. He was the snake she'd freed. And she knew it deep down. The guy, call him Shane now, took Julia to a cave outside town. He coughed up a glowing golden pellet. Snake venom, purified. Swallow this, he said, and the poison's gone. Julia eyed it, hesitant. What if there's no venom left after this? Shane grinned. Then I'm human for good. No more snake life. You cool with that? Julia blushed, ducking her head. Yes, she whispered, I'm in. Name's Shane from now on, he said. I'll treat you right, always. That night, they sealed the deal. A quiet wedding in the cave. Meanwhile, Don and Daniel faced the music. Death row for their crimes. The King family fortune got clawed back from the mess. Bit by bit. Laura, Julia's real mom, broke Walter's heart all over again. He begged the county judge to spare her. And she went free, only to shave her head and join a convent. Silent and ashamed. Shane and Julia took care of Walter and Lily, giving them a peaceful retirement. After the old folks passed, the couple vanished. No one knew where they went. This story ain't about superstition, folks. It's old-school American grit. Pushing good over evil. That's the first tale done. Stick around. Nancy Thompson's got another one coming your way. Now that the first tale's wrapped, let's dive into story number 2. Don't miss out, I'm betting you'll be hooked.
Right from the get-go, just like last time.
This one's called The Boy and the Girl. A slice of American folklore with a twist. Here we go. In the quiet town of Youngsville, there lived a sharp young scholar named Peter Young. One evening, some buddies invited him over for dinner. His friend's place was just a few blocks away.
Down in Westside Alley.
Close enough to hoof it. Peter grabbed his jacket and set out on foot. As he hit West Side, he noticed a ruckus. Folks crowding around, buzzing like bees. Peter, curious as a cat, wove through the mob to see what was up. There stood a scrawny woman, face cold as stone, with a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, clinging to her leg for dear life. The woman barked, "You're nothing but a money pit. No one's buying you today. So it's off to the shady side of town. No point wasting food on you." The kid wailed, "Mama, I'll be good. Don't ditch me."
Illit halva sandwicha de, I svea.
Peter couldn't stand it. His heart twisted watching the scene. He turned to the crowd. What's her deal? Why's she so hard on the kid? Someone piped up, "That's Ruth Goodman. She's a hustler, trades kids like cattle. Sells them off as help to big-shot families.
Rich fuchs around here like, Young.
7 or 8's perfect for training upright.
Ruth kaukt ze stares and got anzi.
To shake the girl loose. She stomped on her hand.
Marking the kid u elp and the epsilons naughty tears.
The little girl was a stunner though. Fair skin, red lips, pearly teeth, and bright, clear eyes that screamed smarts.
Shet grow upper beauty, no doubt.
Ruth had just tried unloading her to some fancy house. But when they asked the girl to talk, she clammed up, mute as a rock. The buyers flipped, accusing Ruth of scamming him with a deaf mute, and kicked her out. Turns out the kid could talk. She'd faked it to tank the deal. Furious, Ruth decided to sell her to a rougher crowd instead. Peter wasn't having it. He stepped up to Ruth, firm but calm. "I'll buy her, name your price."
Ruth lit up, smelling up Heide. She's top stock, cost me plenty.
50 books, minimum. Peter shook his head, that was steep. They haggled back and forth.
Landing at 30 books in the end.
He didn't have that much on him. So he scribbled an IOU.
"Come by my place tomorrow for the cash."
Ruth sized him up, decent enough. Took the note, set a pickup time, and handed the girl over, strolling off satisfied.
Peter crouched down to the girl's level.
Gentle as could be.
"What's your name, Kid?"
She hesitated, eyes darting. Then mumbled, "Mama never gave me one. But my daddy used to call me Daisy."
"Daisy Bloom, when I was little."
Peter smiled, warm and easy. "Daisy Bloom it is, then."
"Jure wisse me now."
Dinner with his buddies was long shot by then. So he took Daisy's hand and led her back to his place instead.
Blink, and 10 years flee by. Daisy Bloom grey upper real knockut.
Graceful as a willow.
Face like a spring flower in full bloom.
Stick a daisy in her hair, and she'd outshine any prom queen hands down. Peter's house was a busy one. Big family, lots of women under one roof. And yeah, they squabbled sometimes. All the girls tried copying Daisy's style, but none could match her natural vibe.
Daisy was a game, kviet, kind.
Never fishing for praise or fighting for spotlight. She worked hard, kept her head down, and didn't play games with folks' feelings. Whenever Peter or his wife tossed her a little bonus, some cash or a treat, she'd share it with anyone who needed a hand. Young or old, guy or gal.
Everybody in the house loved Daisy Bloom.
She was the glue that kept things smooth. Peter had a daughter, Nora Young, who'd been promised to a guy since she was a toddler. An old-school family deal. Nora was set to marry Tom Hardy, the eldest son of a college pal of Peter's. A book-smart guy from Preston City. Local custom said a bride brought 2 girls along. Helpers to keep her steady in her new home. They were the family's face. So they had to be sharp and capable. Especially since Preston was way up north.
Far from Jungsville.
Nora needed someone she could trust. Someone who'd have her back in a strange place. Peter picked Daisy for the job. She was smart, steady, and Nora's age. Practically sisters after growing up together. The other girl was Poppy Lane. Pretty too, but Daisy and Nora were tight as could be. On the big day, Peter threw a 10-mile send-off bash.
All Redstreamer and Fanfare.
Watching his girl head off to wedded life.
Noras Groom, Tom Hardy, was a catch. Handsome, Breni, the whole package.
He and Nora made a picture-perfect pair. And after the wedding, they got along swell.
A solid, loving start.
But when Tom first laid eyes on Daisy, he was floored. Couldn't believe a girl that gorgeous existed. Tom fancied himself a smooth-talking charmer. And Daisy's looks lit a fire in him. Since she was Nora's helper, he couldn't just make a move.
No Utrecht, anyway. Tom started shaming.
Finding excuses to get Daisy close. Help me with this, fetch that, whatever worked. He'd try to catch her alone. Hoping to push boundaries he shouldn't. But Daisy wasn't born yesterday. She saw right through his game.
Whenever Tom came sniffing around,
she'd dodge him like a pro. If she couldn't duck out, she'd flat out say, "I'm not here to wait on you." Daisy had too much self-respect to play along. She turned down his little gifts and volunteered for grunt work out back instead, with Daisy keeping her distance in front of folks. Tom couldn't keep pushing without looking sleazy, so he backed off and turned his attention to Poppy Lane instead. He tried the same tricks, cornering her a few times too many. Word got around, and Nora caught wind of it. She pieced together why Daisy was hiding out back. Tom was chasing skirts right after their vows. Furious, she lit into him, and they had a blowout fight.
Tom slunk off, not daring to bother Poppy again.
Tom's folks weren't from Preston City originally. Their roots were way out near Capital City. His dad, Henry Hardy, had hit a wall after college and quit climbing the ladder. He'd moved to Preston to work under his uncle,
a local bigwig,
and built a tidy fortune with some clever deals. Now Henry was getting old. Tom was hitched, and he wanted to retire back home.
Right after the wedding,
he wrapped up his Preston business and took the whole family,
Tom, Nora, and all, back to Capital City.
They rented 2 big riverboats from Preston's docks, planning to float down to Capital City. Henry, his wife, and Nora's in-laws took the lead boat, while Tom, feeling scolded after a drunken night out, sulked on the second one with a hired help. The boats chugged along, close enough to shout between them. One night, they docked at Yangsville Port.
Tollate to diesem Bag.
So everyone stayed on board, pacing the decks or crashing in their cabins. Tom was restless,
soaking in the moonlight over the river.
He had a deckhand warm up a flask of bourbon and set out some snacks, sipping solo in his cabin. A few drinks in, he was buzzed, when a creak from the other boat caught his ear. He peeked out. A window swung open across the way. At first, he thought pirates, but then a figure climbed out. A woman, judging by the silhouette.
Moments later, a splash.
She was peeing off the side, standing up like a guy.
Tom squinted through the dark.
No moon, but he'd know that outline anywhere. It was Daisy. Daisy? Standing to pee? His foggy brain churned. Was some dude dressed as her? He double-checked. Nope, it was Daisy Bloom, clear as day. What the hell was going on? Too rattled to barge over right then. He stewed on it.
Killed the lights.
And tried to sleep it off. But his mind wouldn't quit spinning. The next morning, Henry decided the family needed a breather. The boat trip was wearing them thin.
Tight lay over at Yangsville Port for a day.
Stock up on grub and fresh water. Tom, still half hungover from the bourbon, didn't roll out of bed till noon. And even then, he looked like a wreck. Last night's weirdness gnawed at him, keeping him tossing all night. He stumbled out of his cabin,
rubbing bleary eyes,
trying to shake the fog. Out on deck, Tom caught an earful. The cook, Mrs. Lou, chewing out her 8-year-old boy.
Quit your yapping, you little Leah.
Or I'll toss you overboard for the fish, she snapped. The kid whimpered, but Ma, you said kids shouldn't lie.
I'm telling the truth, weshalb rejumet.
Tom waved the boy over, curious. What truth you talking about, kid? The tyke glanced at his mom, nervous. Then blurted, Daisy looks like a lady. But I swear she talks like a guy sometimes. Mrs. Lu clamped a hand over his mouth, hushing him quick.
Tom scoot flippet.
The kid's words lined up with what he'd seen. He handed the boy a cookie. Run along now. Then pulled Mrs. Lu aside, all casual-like. You've been around the house forever, Lu.
Real Stidivorka.
You and Daisy both pitchin' out back, right? Ever notice anything off about her? Lu thought it over, scratching her head. She's easy to get along with, sure. But keeps folks at arm's length. Doesn't chatter much. And come to think of it, I don't reckon I've ever seen her take a sip of water. Tom glanced around, nobody close. And leaned in, voice low. Last night, I saw her.
Daisy, doing so meeting wird auf the boat.
Standing up, like a guy. What do you make of that? Mrs. Lu's eyes went wide.
Lordy, tat's wild.
If she's up to something funny. Mr. and Mrs. Hardy are on that other boat. Could be trouble. I gotta warn him to watch her. She spun around and hightailed it to the lead boat,
leaving Tom smirking.
His little seed of doubt was planted. Sure enough, Mrs. Lu spilled it all to Nora, who hauled Daisy in front of Tom to talk it out. Honey, Nora sighed, there's something I never told you. Me and Daisy grew up tight. But she's 18 now and never had her monthly. I figured everybody's different. But after what Lu saw, I'm starting to wonder. Nora'd always thought it odd. Daisy wouldn't bathe with her, claiming her hands were too rough to help. Tom jumped in, let's get her here. Ask her straight up.
Tee draget Daisy over.
And she was sweating bullets. Face tight, not saying a word. Tom grilled her, what's your deal, huh?
No answer. Justet sie längse.
Nora softened, Daisy, if we got this wrong.
Clear it up.
I'll back you, I won't let him hurt you. Tom, though, had other ideas. He figured if Daisy was a girl, he'd spin it into a chance to snag her as a side piece. Nora didn't argue. Daisy was her pick. And pushing back might stir gossip with Tom's folks. Tom stepped toward Daisy, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. Daisy backed into a corner, eyes wide as Tom closed in, reaching for her shirt strings. Just as his fingers brushed the fabric,
a loot boom rockets the boat.
The whole deck shuddered, knocking everyone flat. Screams cut through the air.
Riva pirates.
They're robbing us. More shouts followed.
Panic spreading like wildfire.
Tom yanked the cabin door open. Masked thugs in rowboats were swarming the ship, mean as hornets and twice as fast. Tom spun to Nora, barking. Stay put, hide. Don't come out. Then he bolted, scrambling to shore for help.
Leaving Daisy and Nora behind Withut ase kontukt.
Nora curled up on the bed,
shaking like a leaf. Toskaret to move.
Footsteps thumped closer. The pirates were looting room by room.
Avomans Epsilon rang out next door. And Daisy sprang into action, shoving a table against the door.
Nora, quick, swap clothes with me, she hissed.
Nora frotze, brain lock it up.
But Daisy wasn't waiting. She yanked Nora's fancy dress off, tossing her the maid's outfit instead, grabbing a potted plant. She smeared mud over Nora's face and arms.
Made here look like a grimy nobody.
When they bust in, Daisy whispered.
Keep your mood shoot, ek dump. Nora nodded. That's it.
As the door splintered under heavy kicks, she squeaked, ducking down, hugging her knees tight. Daisy turned to face the intruders. A big guy, Tiger Dan, stormed in.
Het honcho of the river rats.
He stopped dead, gawking at her.
Well, dam, ain't you a sicht?
Prettiest catch I've seen yet.
The room's setup screamed rich girl.
And he pegged Daisy as the prize. Don't fret, darlin', he leered. Play nice, and I won't hurt you. His eyes raked over her, smirking like he'd hit the jackpot. Daisy sighed, guess my luck's run dry. Take me, just leave my maid alone. Tiger Dan glanced at Nora. Huddled in the corner. Face filthy, clothes ragged. Next to Daisy, she was invisible. Not worth a second look. Deal, he grunted. You come with me. And that ugly duckling's free. Daisy helped Nora up.
Whispering, run, now.
Nora stumbled out, dodging pirates who barely glanced her way. Too plain to bother with.
Skjehitse sjåre, bretless.
While Tiger Dan kicked the door shut behind Daisy.
Tiger Dan advanced, grinning ugly.
But Daisy wasn't going quiet. She'd stashed a teacup in her sleeve. When he got close, she smashed it over his head. Blood trickled down his face. He roared, eyes blazing, and backhanded her to the floor. Still fuming, he kicked her ribs. Hard enough to make her feel her guts twist. You'll pay for that, girl, he snarled, ripping at her dress. Then he froze.
Watse jureagi. Tiger Dans face twisted.
He'd been duped, and it stung worse than the cut on his head. Playing me for a fool, huh? He laid into Daisy.
Fists flying, turning that pretty face. Into a swollen, bloody mess.
Right then, a shout broke through. Boss, scatter. Law's here. The chaos on the boats had hit the shore. Folks ran to the sheriff. And now deputies were swarming in.
Ganz draun, rounding abstract glares.
Tiger Dan glared at Daisy.
Out cold on the floor.
Too gorgeous to be a guy. And it ticked him off even more. Bad luck, he spat. Then bolted out to join his crew. Piling into their skiffs and rowing hard. The law stormed aboard.
Nabbing the pirates too slow to flee. Tom, hiding in a corner.
Popped out when he saw badges.
Grinning like he'd saved the day. Hey, over here, fellas.
Tom sprinted to Nora's cabin.
Heart sinking at the busted door. Inside, a woman lay sprawled.
Clothes torn, face hidden by tangled hair. He thought it was Nora.
God, honey, I'm sorry.
I shouldn't have left you. He dropped to his knees.
Pounding the floor, tears streaming.
The crowd outside peeked in, muttering about the poor girl, and cursing the pirates louder. Then a voice cut through.
Cold, sharp, familiar.
If you'd known it'd come to this. The voice said, why'd you run off solo? Ever think what leaving your wife behind might cost? Tom spun around, red-faced. Who's that? Nora stepped in, slow and steady.
Grabbing a blanket to cover the woman.
She splashed water on her face. It was Daisy, battered but breathing. Tom blinked, stunned.
You're okay? Nora, you're fine.
She shot him a look of pure disgust. A man who'd ditch her wasn't worth spit.
Daisy stiert, groaning.
And Nora rushed to prop her up, brushing hair back to see the damage.
Weshalb did you do it?
Nora cried.
Risking your life for me. You could run.
Daisy managed a weak smile. Since Peter took me in.
You've been my sister.
Looked out for me, always. How could I leave you in danger? That's not who I am. Her torn clothes showed the truth.
Among body under the squeeze.
Nora stared, then asked soft. Why'd you hide as a girl? Daisy sighed. After staring death down. The weight of years came spilling out. My folks were dirt poor. So broke they had to sell a kid to eat. I was 7, my little sister younger. I couldn't let her go. So I dressed up as a girl instead. Took her place. Looked enough like one to pass.
Dad sollt mich ab to root. Scaret somi und catch on.
And she never did. Henry and his wife rushed over. Hearing Nora's cabin got hit by the pirates. They caught Daisy's story just as she finished spilling it. Henry, a straight shooter with a good head, stepped up. Daisy, you saved Nora. Kept our family's name from getting dragged through the mud. Once you're patched up, you decide what's next, stay or go, your call. He shot Tom a cold look.
Disappointment carved deep.
Snorted, and walked off. They set Daisy up in a guest room on the boat. A maid tending her round the clock. When they hit Capital City, Henry called in the best dock money could buy. Tiger Dan had roughed her up bad. But Daisy'd been smart. Dodged the worst blows to her vitals. Half a year of rest. And she'd be back on her feet. Nora, meanwhile, wrote a long letter to Peter in Youngsville, laying out Daisy's whole deal. Peter got the letter and nearly fell out of his chair, rereading it twice to believe it. He scratched out a poem on the spot.
Fürst Glangse, a girl. Dichtepa, a gi.
Truth's a wild ride. Then he hopped a train to Capital City, bringing a gift for Daisy. Nora'd already fixed her up, ditched the dresses for a sharp suit, turning Daisy into a proper gent. Peter clapped her on the shoulder. You risked it all for Nora. That's family-level loyalty. I raised you like a daughter. And here you're a son instead. Peter grinned, since you're a man.
Daisy Bloom don't fit no more.
I've been thinking.
How about Jasper Young?
Means something precious. And I hope you'll live up to it.
Stand tall and right.
Jasper's eyes lit up. Caught off guard but touched.
He hooked Peter quick.
Pa, thanks. Peter nodded. Stick with me, son. Hit the books, I'll show you the ropes. They headed back to Youngsville together. Jasper ready for a fresh start. Peter'd always known Jasper was bright. And with some schooling, the kid took off like a rocket. A few years down the line, Jasper aced the state exams. Landed a big-shot government job out west. Before he shipped out, Peter paired him up with Poppy Lane, the other girl from Nora's wedding crew. And they tied the knot. Jasper knew hardship firsthand. So he worked clean, helping folks out and earning their respect. Jasper and Poppy stuck together, love holding strong through the years. They grew old side by side. A quiet, steady kind of happy. And that's the tale, folks. Done and dusted. If you liked it, drop a comment below. Hit that subscribe button. And share it around. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time with another yarn.